Well, I came here for 23 years, from 1971, from internment, came in. Finton was interned for 2 periods, and then he was sentenced to 12 years, and then my son Phelim was sentenced to 7 life sentences. So he was 17 years here. So I was coming from 1971 until 1994. And the only break that I got out of that was during 1974, when I was in Armagh jail myself, and Siobhan took over all the visiting here between Armagh, Crumlin Road, who was she was visiting Kevin, another son was in Crumlin Road, and then the boys here. So that's how prisons were very much part of our lives for a long, long time. The No Worse protest was really dreadful, really dreadful. And to look back now and know how they lived in this cell with only a blanket on them.
But at the time too, it was hard being outside. You didn't want to think too much of the conditions that they were in,
yeah,
because it would have been too heartbreaking. You had to try and put it to the back of your mind to a certain degree.
Well, at one time, Phelim, during the very, very harsh times, during the No Worse protest, and the screws would have just gone unexpectedly to this cell or that cell, and it dragged out the prisoner. Of course, they resisted all the time. They went to take them out and they resisted, and they were dragged maybe between 4 or 5 screws. And to think now that they've been dragged down this floor to that washroom, whatever it were over there, and as Phelim told me, they would have been thrown into either a bath of cold water or a bath of scalding hot water, and they were scrubbed with a deck scrubber and carbolic soap, and then one screw would have held up the long hair and another one would have cut it. Did the same with the beard. When I look at this place now and know what happened to him in those days, it's dreadful. And at one time I got a report out that he had sustained very bad injuries and had got a broken jaw and a broken nose. And this word came out through the prisoners' relatives group that they had set up. As it turned out, thankfully, no, his jaw wasn't broken, but he did get a very bad beating up that day.
That's
And it's even dreadful to think of that now, that happened to my son. So it does bring it back very, very clearly. There's no doubt, even after all these years. The hunger strikes gained an awful lot for both the prisoners and their families. Everything did change quite a lot now. Things were beginning to come around again. It was a lot different, and the screw would have stayed up there at the top, and he didn't bother. And in fact, maybe after an hour or an hour and a quarter, the screw would have come down and put the visiting paper down and said, "Right, Phelim, whenever you're ready." You know, it was unbelievable, the difference that came about.
Definitely got more lenient after that.
Yeah.
It did.
So that's memories of these visits, very, very clear. Fintan was released. His sentence was over in 1983, I think. Fintan got out, but Phelim wasn't out until 1994. Finally, they would have given them a date when they were getting out, and they were actually put on pre-release work, and he would have been up and down to Belfast to work.
Right.
And that went on for about a year, and then they were given a date. So we couldn't contain ourselves really to know when for the date that he was getting out. So the last visit that I came down to collect him and bring him out, I went in to collect his clothes and his belongings in one of the rooms. And up till that, in all the years, I would have never spoken to the screws, you know, never had conversation with them other than handing in my permit or whatever. And when I signed for his clothes that day, I looked up at those two screws standing behind the desk, and I looked up and I says, "Do you see that signature? We'll take it and frame it and put it up there, because I've been coming for 23 years and hopefully this is the last." So that was the only time I talked to them. So thankfully it was the last.
I think that it's important that one of these things stays here, that people can experience it. But then it's like any sort of experience, they have no reference to being here as when this was a living beast. Now it's a shell it's a snake skin of a beast, you know. It's discarded, unwanted, and rusting. But it's discarded snakeskins are really interesting. I think it's a really interesting place. I think it's really important, and not to keep the whole thing maybe, because it's a Goliath, like. But I think it's important to keep something so that, like, you know, the younger generations, I sound old, the younger generations don't have any reference, don't have any experience, and they should know this is their history. Billy was right, you know.